We are going live, preparing.
Do I just press share on my share screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rust London Virtual Talks. I'm just going to share my screen. Go to present. Right. Okay. So, welcome everyone to the Rust London Virtual Talks. My name's Ernest, I'm your host, and I want to thank you all for being here. I'll probably give, everyone virtually a few more minutes to stumble in, whether they're cooking dinner or still in their pajamas or whatever, So this is going to be really informal and really interesting how we manage all of this. But thank you all for being here all the same. This is the Rust London Talks. This is the community meetup for the Rust London user group. We are a community of developers, DevOps, all kinds of people who are interested in the Rust programming language. The community is actually comprised of 3 different kinds of meetups that we try to put on for everyone in London. The meetups serve as a platform for the Rust London community to share knowledge, to share experiences, and to showcase projects. That's what this is. That's what the London Talks is. We usually host this event at TrueLayer. TrueLayer is the home of the Rust London community. They are an amazing startup with a purpose-built space who allow us to host our events, and they take care of hosting the Code Dojo for us as well. The Rust London community has been running since June 2014. And the other 2 events that are run are the Code Dojo, which is actually hosted and completely managed by TrueLayer as well. That serves as a directed learning exercise for people who want to bootstrap themselves in the Rust programming language from zero to hello world. We're also planning, hopefully, on running the Rust London Hack and Learns again. This is an event that we used to host in 2015 and 2016, which allowed for a very casual hacking space for people to come together and learn from each other. Whether you're a bit more experienced or you're a complete newbie, you can come in and you can learn more about what the Rust programming language is and how to get yourself started in building things with it. So before all of this craziness kicked off, we had our first meetup in January at TrueLayer, and we set out the focus for the community for this year. And that still stands regardless of the circumstances that we're in. The main aim for this year is to continue to build on the amazing momentum from last year. Last year was such a tipping point for both the language in itself and the entire ecosystem. We had async await going into the standard library, and we also had so much growth and so many dev shops starting to take Rust more seriously, moving from just it being a language that people were interested in to actually seeing real use cases, seeing people use Rust in production. So here we come to today's meetup and the purpose of today's meetup. The focus is to showcase what different domains of the Rust ecosystem are doing with the language and with the tools. Rust is used in a number of different areas for a number of different things. and you're seeing lots of really cool projects come out of those different domains, like the embedded space. You're seeing so much stuff being done with WebAssembly, so many command line tools being built all the time, and GameDev, which will be the focus for today. GameDev is something that's really close to my heart personally, and I really wanted to showcase what's going on in that arena, in that avenue of Rust development, because I feel personally we don't get a chance to see all the amazing things that the graphics community are doing with Rust, what the game dev in general are doing with Rust. So I wanted to really give those folks an opportunity to showcase what you can do with this programming language in game dev, if that's your thing. Coming back to Rust in production, we're seeing more and more dev shops and more projects being built out with Rust. We have just a number of companies here who are using Rust in production. And this is very encouraging to see more of what is being done and the potential of the language. And hopefully we're going to see a few game dev studios in this slide in the future, hopefully, as things progress and as tooling and more libraries are being built, more crates are being built that allow you to do more cool things with Rust in game development. So as always, the Rust London community adheres to the Berlin Code of Conduct, and that Code of Conduct still stands, whether we're virtual or whether we're all together at a venue. And this is just really simple stuff. We are gonna try and manage this whole situation as best as possible. So one of the things that we've had to tweak about the meetup format is the questions and answers aspect. So we're gonna use Slido. The Slido app has been emailed out to people. It's also been sent out on Twitter. And after each talk, each speaker will also have the Slido link as a presentation slide right at the end. So that's how we'll collate your questions, and we're gonna have Aris Martorelli from TrueLayer, who will be the moderator of both the chat room and of the questions. So please just, you know, we don't need any weird trolling. We don't need any kind of like silly questions or anything. Please feel free to fire off as many emojis and as many memes as you want. Any Rust related memes are fine. Emojis, clap emojis, fire emojis are absolutely fine. But as we interact with each other, both virtually and physically, hopefully one day soon, we need to just be aware of how we behave to each other. Aris Martorelli will moderate the questions, and he will select the ones that will be chosen for the Q&A, which will be in a panel format at the end of the last speaker. This is the Slido link, and the QR code. So if you want to just scan that, you'll be able to ask your questions in Slido, and Aris will moderate those. Okay, please follow us on Twitter. That's the best way to interact with us. That's the best way to get involved. The hashtag for today's meetup is Rust London, hashtag Rust London. And as a way to kind of continue the meetup feel, we've been invited into the Rust Game Dev Discord for virtual drinks afterwards. So as with all meetups, you always go for drinks afterwards at the pub. We can't do that now. So if you want to go into the Discord room with a beer in your hand and continue to chat amongst each other and continue to ask more questions about game dev in Rust, please feel free. That is the URL for the Rust Game Dev Discord server. I'll share that on Twitter and on Meetup as well. Okay, so today's agenda. I'm going to go through a few quick announcements very quick announcements, and then we'll switch over to our first speaker, Alex Ine from the Rust Game Dev Working Group. So the first announcement, and really the only one, is we're going to be having a special event towards the end of this month for the coronavirus situation that we're in. It's going to be with one of our community members called Bibit. They are a team that are trying to, they're a startup that are building out the Babylon Health of financial advice. So they have a system where you're able to have one-to-one consultations over video chat with a financial director, with a financial advisor, and they're building out that platform using Rust. And they're going to be hosting a Q&A session for developers who are self-employed, and that can mean a lot of things in terms of whether you're employed as a developer in a dev shop, or if you are actually fully freelance and you have yourself as a business entity. We'll be hosting a Q&A with them to talk about things like IR35 and other sorts of questions in regards to how to navigate through a lot of this situation as a freelance developer, as a self-employed developer, whatever your status may be. And I'm going to have more details on that in the coming days. I'm going to post up on Meetup who the financial advisors are going to be and how we're going to work out that format. So that will be more towards the end of the month. And also further details on May and June, London talks will also be given then as well. Thank you very much. We're now going to switch to Alex, who is our first speaker. He is from the Rust Game Dev Working Group. He's the lead of the Rust Game Dev Working Group, and he'll be talking to us about why Rust is a great option for game development and what the Rust Game Dev Working Group does. Thank you very much. Clap emoji. I want to see loads of clap emojis in the chat. Thank you very much.
Hello.
We're just going to switch over now.
Is this working? All right. Hi. So my name is Alex, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Rust game development, why I think it's an interesting match, and how Rust and what the Rust game development working group does, just so everyone gets a nice image about what our role is here and what do we believe in relation to Rust and its application to game development. And this is quite interesting because previously, I mean, in general, game development isn't super open about this kind of things. So it's quite interesting to see how you can do this kind of a thing in an open source scenario. But before we proceed, well, who am I? I did, oh, nice, these are completely wrongly animated, but I worked on a bunch of video games in the past. I'm not in the game industry anymore. And sometimes I like to code in my spare time. I worked on stuff like gameplay, AI, engine, tooling, basically whatever was needed at these games. From this list, in case anyone wonders, my favorite one is Door Kickers. Go buy it if you didn't already. It's an awesome game. I do stream sometimes, Rust. That's my cat, Pixel. doing code reviews with me. And in my spare time, I work on a Rust game, which is kind of a combination of Dwarf Fortress, Gnomoria, Rimworld. That's about managing your colony of dwarves, and each of them has their own AI. And I'm building this in Rust, and I did it kind of as an experiment, but the more I use Rust, I realized that this is an amazing language for game development for a few reasons, especially for me. So these are I'm going to have this slide. I think it's in all the Rust presentations, but this is kind of biased because it's about what I experienced. So the biggest reason, especially with a spare time project like this, is productivity. And you might find it a bit weird because you need to find a borrow checker or whatever. But actually, not. I'm really lazy. So the fact that I'm not allowed to do a hack just to share some data to see get something going, and or do this tiny experiment just to have something appear on the screen or whatever, Rust forces you to do the right things in a relationship to data ownership and how data moves around your program. And that's amazing, being forced to do it, because otherwise I'm very lazy. This is my spare time thing, so I just want to do stuff as fast as possible. But once you have your project going, even if it slowed you down in the beginning, it's really, really easy to refactor. It's almost a bit too easy. Like my best example when this really shined was adding multi-threading to our pathfinding algorithm. So that was pretty cool. Because Rust just told me about, hey, you're sharing these two things across two threads and they're not protected by any mutex, and that's not cool. So that was amazing instead of finding it by debugging. Another thing that I really like about Rust is the ecosystem, in the sense that besides the libraries, being able to do cargo build and have something that works on Linux, Mac, and Windows is kind of magical coming from the C++ land. So, and almost all of your libraries just work, which is pretty amazing, to me at least. And the last reason I'm going to have here, why I think this was a great choice, is it's really easy to write some tests. And I don't know about you all, but I don't like writing tests. I just don't. Especially, I mean, it's my spare time project. I do something in it, I have it done, and then I'm again lazy, don't want to add it. But here, you just write something in your file, Rust file, put the test tag, and it just runs as a test whenever you need it. So not having to deal with Google Test Framework or other stuff like in C++. That's pretty neat. And again, it goes back to that productivity idea. And this led me to think about more broader applications about Rust in the game development world, as well as pushing amongst many people to start this game developer working group, because I think Rust can be the default option for game development instead of C++. And when I mean game development, I don't read with not only games, but also engine development is another big category of, I can hide this, cool, of applications. So what is the Rust game dev working group? So it's basically a group of people that is focused on improving the experience of other people who use Rust for game development. And we do this mostly, I mean, I think it's not mostly, it's as a part-time thing. So it's all a passion project of all the members there. That's why if you look at things progressing slowly, it's because we all do this in our spare time. So it's quite challenge, but you'll see about a bunch of cool things that the group has done. And what do we mean by improving experience? So there's a lot of areas where we could do better as a community. Areas like documentation, is one of them, and having better tutorials, categories for certain libraries of projects, tooling. I spent a lot of time, to my shame, trying to improve Rust language server, basically building like a test harness for it, and then Rust Analyzer came along, and now I'm a full convert. So yeah, just use Rust Analyzer whenever you need a good IDE experience. But also tooling, using Rust for game tools and additional tooling in there, not just for gameplay and game engine programming. And there's a bunch of discussions about missing libraries, unmaintained libraries, things where the group can help in terms of the ecosystem. Another thing which progresses very slowly is to deal with language requests, specifically for game development. I don't know if everyone's familiar with what game development is, but it's not the most careful industry. So there's a few discussions, for example, around floating point optimizations and things like that that are at odds with the security and safety part versus the speed gains. So there's a bunch of subjects here that are, at least I'm trying to work to find a consensus around it. So as a practical thing, besides, I have a bunch of links here, but we also maintain right now Are We Game Yet, which is a pretty cool website where you can find resources about Rust games written in Rust, and it's quite good to get you started with a bunch of libraries, I think. There's a monthly newsletter. I'm not sure it's out yet for this month, but you can actually contribute to it if you go in this in the Rust GameDev GitHub organization, and there's a bunch of open issues there. You can also read the previous months, 7 months. I think this is number 8 now or 9. The previous months here, and it's actually pretty amazing how many Rust projects are happening right now. And this is the GitHub organization. Because we're from all over the world, we are doing everything through GitHub issues, and we're kind of avoiding taking decisions in meetings because it's hard for us to synchronize like that. So if you just check out the issues there, you will see like what's being currently discussed, what issues need help, and so on. One thing another lead of the working group did is this survey, which was pretty interesting. I would like to show you some results because I'm not sure this is as popular as it deserved. But basically, we had like 400 participants. 50% of them were using Rust for game development. 45% of participants were considering using Rust for game development, and 5% just had opinions and they weren't considering or using Rust. So one important thing here is, which is quite interesting as well, besides this split, is that 75% of them were doing it as a hobby, and the rest, I think, are just Embark employees that responded. So that's pretty cool, which kind of shows how we're still at the early beginning stages of Rust and its applicability here. And it's gaining more and more momentum. This was quite a while back, but it took a while for the results to be processed and so on. It was a really cool thing Erlen did here. So I'm going to present to you what the community thinks that are the strong points of Rust with game development, with relationship to game dev. So almost everyone called safety. No, actually, no. A lot of people called on the safety part of Rust as one of the strong points. Performance, the community and help people get, cargo, making it easy for you to do basically anything you want. With keep in mind that the background here is likely C++ or maybe not even. And the ecosystem around it was also quite well regarded. However, the weak points is also the ecosystem maturity, where a lot of people called out that libraries are in a weird situation sometimes, with one maintainer helping it in its spare time or whatever. So that's not inspiring a lot of confidence, I assume. Iteration times, I think this is one of my biggest pain point as well, because I change one line of code in my project and I wait like 6-7 seconds for a rebuild, which is absolutely, I think, huge. So there's a lot to improve here. Documentation was also called out as something to be improved, because game development, especially engine development, is made up of people who are usually quite experienced, and there's very little information past the stage where you get started with a project. So that's something that can be improved. Like, okay, we got a simple snake game running. What's next? What's the next thing that happens from there? And it's kind of a big leap to take, and it involves a lot of investigation and work to get to a point where you're comfortable with the language such that you can do more advanced stuff, which is probably not different from other languages, but it's still a pretty big gap. And of course, lack of engines that were proven. Basically, this was kind of, we have a few of them, they're progressing really good, but there's not a flagship Rust game or a product like we have the Mozilla renderer. And now there's a lot of Rust projects in general that you can say, look, these companies are using it at scale in production, but not in gaming yet. So you have like Dropbox, Discord using Rust, but there's no such example from the gaming world right now. So if you're interested in this type of work and knowing what gaps are there, there's a lot of work in need of contributions. So there's a few discussions about async ecosystem runtime sharing, which isn't really runtime, but sharing their thread pools and async runners, because right now each of them, you have libraries that bring their own runtime and they cannot share like a thread pool or something like similar. So that's not that's some open issue that's still under discussion. How would an API for this look like? What can we do around it? There's another, this is an older project that hasn't moved forward in a bunch of time. SPIRV Rust, pure Rust generator to reduce the dependency of shader C. Another not super recent, but quite important, I think, project is this asset transformation pipeline, which is quite an interesting idea that was discussed a little bit, which was, it's similar if you know GStreamer, which is basically a pipeline to transform data through all sorts of plugins. It's a kind of a similar idea, but for game dev assets. So you take your Maya things, you plug them into this pipeline, you have this transform applied to them and this other transform, and at the end you get this other format optimized for your game engine or whatever other use case you'd want it optimized for. So this is a pretty interesting idea. I think Amethyst is doing some work around this, but yeah. And there's some discussion around branch prediction hints, as well as floating point optimizations that are happening, which should be interesting to participate in, and also need help. As I said, on the GitHub, oh yeah, WASM is an interesting idea that I've been toying with, and not only using WebAssembly as a target, but using WebAssembly as your scripted language. So you can imagine like a game engine that instead of like Unity, instead of C#, you can write something that your user code in something that compiles to WebAssembly. So you can have modules written in whatever JavaScript and Rust and whatnot, all working with your game engine. So that's pretty cool, I think, as an idea. I did a bit of experimentation on it, and WebAssembly is also quite new right now as a standard, or WebAssembly WASI, basically the system interface, but it's quite an interesting space in there that probably is worth looking at from the game development perspective. I have a slide here. I'm not super sure how much time I have, but I have a slide about sneaking Rust into your projects. And I may or may not have done this at my actual job, but yeah, first of all, don't rewrite something in Rust just because you can. Just don't do it because it's annoying. And there's a few ways to introduce Rust and prove its worth to your colleagues and whoever is interested in looking at it. So basically, the one super cool thing that you can do is just prove its value in things which are not on the critical path. So for example, you can write small tools in Rust instead of whatever other language you're using, and they will be like super fast. Or if you have like, probably all games have asset pipeline transformations, which are specific to your game, that take your Maya or 3D Max data and transform it into game data. If you have stuff around it, you can use Rust as well. And proof of concepts is another great place where you can use Rust just to throw some code together and make sure, make a, I don't know, tiny server or test something super fast. Another area which is quite mature, I would say, as we see it's used in production for a bunch of companies, is around backend services. The game dev side of things, one of the things people called for is using Rust on consoles, which is pretty not an easy problem to solve because of not the technical problem, but just because how the industry works with NDAs and all of those things. So things like backend services and tools are great places to start using Rust and get people familiar with it and show that it's a useful tool to have. I mean, it's a tool after all, so if it works, then just use it where it fits. Yeah, you can find me around the internet and all these places. This is my video game. If you have questions, I suppose you can go here. And do I take questions now, or are they all at the end? I'm not super.
Alex, they're all going to be at the end when we have the panel.
All right. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, go here for
worries.
questions. And should I leave you now to present? Right. That's
okay.
Me.
Thank you very much, Alex. Clap emojis, please. Clap emojis. Want to see loads of clap emojis. Fire emojis, clap emojis, dab emojis. Throw your memes in there. Show your appreciation to Alex. Thank you very much for doing that. Now, moving on, we're going to have our second speaker, Olivia Ifirim. She's a senior developer at Twitter, and she'll be demoing her game, which she used to learn Rust, and she'll be sharing the insights that she gained. So take it from here, Olivia. Thank you very much. Clap emojis and fire emojis and memes and all the rest of it for Olivia. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that amazing intro. All right, just gonna figure out how to share my screen. Make sure I have my notes. Make it full screen. Thanks for coming, everyone. So I see there's 110 people watching, so I cannot like see you, which I normally would in real life, but I know you're enjoying this. So all right, so this is my cheesy title, leveling up in Rust. So here's kind of like roughly the agenda. It's emojis because I like emojis. So I'll tell you a bit about who I am, what I do, how I got into Rust, how I decided to make a game in Rust, and why I decided to make a game. What the game that I'm making is. I'll show you some cool screenshots. It's not really a demo because demos go wrong. So it's more like cute GIFs that have already been compiled and run before. just to eliminate some risk, you know. I'll show you how kind of like the game progressed through time, and I'll share a bit about my experience in working in Rust and kind of the community and all those things, and the good things and the not so good things, or things that we still need to work on as a community. And then at the end, we will just say bye. We will know the questions. So this is me. I'm Olivia. I have a crab symbol next to my Twitter handle, which is how you know that I'm really into Rust. So yeah, I work for Twitter right now. I don't do Rust at Twitter, which is unfortunate, but you know, I'm still working on. I need to take some inspiration from Alex with how to convince people to use Rust. So maybe one day I will use Rust at Twitter. Yeah, I did a bunch of things before. I don't think those things are necessarily very relevant beyond the fact that I haven't really worked much in games. So I don't really have experience in games. Which is why this was kind of interesting for me. And I will perhaps share a different story than Alex, because Alex has been sort of like traditionally working in games before, and now he's not into games, but making a game in his spare time. And for me, it's like completely the opposite. I've never worked in games. I'm just doing this kind of for fun. Yeah, so I think that was kind of, yeah. And the other thing to note is that I am making a game, and you will see the screenshots of the game. And yeah, I think that's it for this slide. So how I got into Rust. So a lot of people told me about it. And they just kept repeating this thing. They're like, oh, I'm learning Rust and it's really cool. And it's like, and I was like, what is so special? And they kept talking about like the ownership model and how things are really different. I was like, yeah, okay, maybe. So I added it to my kind of like virtual list of you know, things that you will look at one day. But yeah, I didn't actually look at it for quite some time. So I also kept like in parallel hearing that it's like the most loved programming language for a few years running. And there's this like great joke that like even on Wikipedia, it says it's the most loved programming language since 2016. So basically like they stopped putting all the years because it was too many years. So 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, you get it, you know how to count. So yeah, I keep hearing this. So that was kind of like, okay, maybe I really do need to try it. And then I sort of got the book. So that was kind of like the catalyst to this whole thing. I got the book as a gift. I feel like it's important for me to say, just to set like realistic expectations, I have not yet finished the book, which should be a really interesting testament of how you can get really far with not reading the full book. Yeah, I basically got about halfway, and then I started doing stuff, which I feel like kind of worked for me. I will definitely finish the book at some point, but let this be a testament to you that you don't really need to read the whole book cover to cover. So, and then like how I kind of got into this is I was like, I'm going to spend the weekend trying to make a game in Rust. And I say there 24 hours, but it was more like 24 hours spread out over a weekend or over a few evenings. I did sleep that weekend, so it was not like a full 24. Don't be worried for my health. And that was March 2019. So it's more than a year now that I have been sort of like embarking on this amazing Rust game dev journey. Yeah, so here's kind of what my idea was, what I wanted to make. So I wanted to make a game where you're the manager of a tennis academy. You can build courts and you can build buildings and you can manage players, and they will play competitions and they will get ranked and they become champions and they sort of graduate from your academy. And every time they graduate, you get more money, so you can buy more courts and you can have more players. So this is kind of like management, like perpetual loop. And you're always like, should I buy more things or should I just get more players? Think like City Skylines with Zoo Tycoon, with Prison Architect, but with tennis. So that was kind of my vision, and we'll get to like what actually happened, but this was kind of the grand vision. So this is kind of what I had after 24 hours. So it was basically, sorry, you have some courts, you have some players, you have this like really basic sort of build mode where you can like click things around. There's no UI, there's no, you know, and they sort of like the players will appear and they will go to the courts and they will play. But I mean, they don't really know they're playing. They're literally just going to the court. But you know what? That's not bad for 24 hours in a language that you don't know. So I was pretty happy with this. I wrote a blog post. It made it to the front page of Hacker News. I should have put a screenshot, but yeah, believe me. And that was like, oh, that's pretty cool. People are really interested in this. So I sort of, that was kind of my trigger to keep sharing and posting and blogging about it. So my Twitter account is full of like funny GIFs and you know, blog posts and things like that. So so yeah, that was not bad for 24 hours, I think. And this was after the 24 hours. I wanted to add animations and add the, you know, the movement that you see and the balls and all those things. And this is where it got really difficult. And the reason why it got really difficult is because I was fighting the border checker really badly. And the reason for that is because I was trying to write code the way you would write code in a different language, in a more normal language. So basically, it was this weird sort of mix of inheritance and composition that just didn't make any sense. And every time you wanted to add something, it was like, I don't know, where should I add it? And it just felt like every time I wanted to do something, I didn't have access to the right data that I needed. So that was kind of a sign that, like, you know, maybe you're doing the wrong thing. Like, if it's really difficult, there's probably a reason, and the reason is you are doing it wrong. And that's fine. So I was like, there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way. So there is a better way, in fact. So it's called ECS, Entity Component System. It's got a fancy name. Don't need to worry about it too much. There's a very simple idea. There's a place where you put data, and there's a place where you put behavior that works on that data. And when you operate on the data, you can do it mutably or immutably. Like, you basically need to change it or you don't need to change it. So one example might be that for, like, the demo you see here, for the players to know that they're playing, they basically need to be on the court. So you need to check where the player is, and you need to check where the court is, and you need to make sure the player is inside the court. But you don't need to change that data. What you need to change is just the state of the player. So that's kind of an example of how you would think about, like, mutability and immutability. And again, the idea is very simple. You put the state of, you know, is the player playing or not in the player component, and you put the logic that checks the positions and modifies the state in one place. So once I did that, everything got really easy. And that was kind of like the success story, right? Like, you don't know how to do something, you kind of go off and figure it out, and then it kind of works, and it's really nice. I think it's worked out pretty well. I would say the only thing that, like, there were probably some more advanced uses of ECS that I kind of had to wrap my head around, but apart from that, I think this pretty happy with this decision. So this is probably about 6 months in after that, after I had ECS. So at this point, I had the ability to add a bunch of things, and I did. So I did a UI, and I did a build menu, and you see here, like, there's like money, and there's time, and there's reputation, and then the players have needs. So you see there, they have like rest and play. So they sort of like go and play, and then they get tired, and then they go to the bench and they sit. And there was only one problem with this. It just didn't fundamentally work because it was really, really complicated. Like, there is no way one single person can fit all of this complexity into their head. So it was kind of, this was probably the closest I got to my vision of what I wanted to make. But I realized it was impossible. So I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm just trying to encourage you to sort of pick a reasonable scope when you're designing something, and especially a game. So basically, at this point, I just could not understand what was going on. So the next step is I kind of like scrapped half of it. I kept my base project because that was all fine. It's just I kind of took out the parts that I didn't think were important. And I also, at this point, it started turning more into a game. Like, you see the players sort of arrive on the left, and they wait for a bit, and then you have to put them on the court, and then they play, and then you get some score. So it already kind of feels more like a game. So game design is important if you want to make a game. I mean, I started making a game just because I wanted to write sort of the fun code that you think comes with making a game. But then I stumbled into all of these, you know, oh, you actually have to design it. You have to make it fun, because otherwise no one will want to play it. So yeah. And then this is probably what it looks like today. I can't remember when I took this GIF. Yeah, small changes since then. So basically, I figured out how to make art. So that was nice. I figured out how to make particle effects. That was probably like the most fun part. And you can see now it really feels more like a game. Like, you have this time pressure, and you have to sort of move people around. And you know, when you get it right, you get more particle effects and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of like what the game looks like right now. One question that I get a lot is like, if the game is open source. So I'm just gonna answer this now before you ask. It is not currently open source, and that's because I'm planning to open source it when I release it. I'm just using this as a carrot stick to myself to basically get myself to finish the game, and then, you know, tidy up the code and like make it all nice so it can be read by other people. So yeah, but there will be a link to like how to play the game and all those things. All right, so going back to the vision, so this is kind of like what the plan was. This is what I actually did. So you are still the manager of a tennis academy. Your power is much less limited than it was before. You can still manage, but again, to a much smaller extent. And it has tennis. That's they do play, and it has tennis. That's pretty much the only thing that stayed. And this is meant to be like more of a cautionary tale. Like it's nice to have a really good vision and to know what you want to do. But if you're a person making this in their spare time, like I am, you're human. You have, other things to do in your life, and you only get to spend like a few hours at a time on this. So really, you need to be very strategic about how you do that. Take that with the fact that you're doing it in a language that you don't know. So there's kind of at every point you're doing something, you're learning both, Rust, game dev, how to actually do things, combine those two things, art, game design. Yeah, but what I can say is like this has been definitely the most fun project I've ever done. So I would highly encourage you to make a game. Just choose the game that you're going to make wisely. So going to the good things now. So I think by far the best thing about this has been the Rust community. So I have a screenshot on the right. So while I was reading the book some time ago, there was a note in the book that said, "Oh, if you want to make your binary small, do use these flags." And I was like, "But why? Like, no one is explaining. They're not explaining why in the book." So I just put this tweet up, and I asked the authors of the book, and the author actually replied to me, and he explained to me, and he explained why that is happening and sort of how that works. So I think this is like a real testament to like how amazing the community is in Rust, and especially the Rust game dev community. So when I started, there were probably like 2 people making games in Rust, and Alex was one of them. So and now there's like hundreds. So yeah, I think the community is definitely the best part, and there's always a lot of sense of like people will help you out if you have a problem. If you're trying to make a crate, people will tell you sort of like what they want from it, or how they would, and people write a lot of blog posts and things like that. So I think that's probably like by far the best thing. The other thing that I would say is that Rust made me a better engineer overall, because it forces you to think differently. And I think this combination of the Rust memory model and ownership, and combined with ECS, I think it really forces you to sort of go out of your comfort zone and think, like force yourself to think in different ways. And I can tell you now that I've started like learning other languages after this, my experience has been totally different because I have all these concepts now. So I have a lot more to play with sort of in my head. So the other good thing is documentation. When there is documentation, it tends to be really good. Books as well, when they are there, they are great. There's just not that many of them. So we need everyone to sort of write more and do more. Same for tutorials. The other thing I would say is making a game is really satisfying. Like actually seeing it work and seeing someone play it is really fun. It's not just that you can share like cute GIFs on the internet and get people to like them, but it's more like it's really rewarding to make something from scratch, and sort of in this ecosystem that like not everything is taken for granted, and not everything is like readily available. Yeah, and I learned a lot. So I think making a game in Rust is probably one of the best ways I would recommend right now to learn Rust. Yeah. Now, some of the downsides, I already mentioned this one. Thinking in ECS was not easy in the beginning, and I still definitely struggle sometimes. And there were some advanced techniques that, like, once I figured out, it was fantastic. The other part, which relates a bit to the ecosystem, like what Alex was mentioning, I really struggled to find good UI crates. So there were a few, but like they're either like built on top of like they just have C++ bindings, or they're like completely new from scratch, but they solve like a very small part of the problem. And I'm not trying to diminish this in it. Like making a UI crate is difficult. But I'm just saying, like this is one of the ways in which you can see that maybe the Rust game dev ecosystem is not like fully there yet, but I think that's kind of what the game dev the game dev group is working on, and definitely improving. So yeah, the other thing I already mentioned before, like game design and pixel art, you have to do those things if you want to make a game. You're not just going to be writing like fun Rust code, although there's definitely a lot of fun Rust code. So yeah, and then the other part was, I think this has gotten better, and I think the working group is definitely helping. But sometimes you will not be able to find how to do something, and I think it's both connected to what Alex was saying, where sometimes you might not know, if you don't know game dev, you might not know what that pattern is called, so you might not even know what to search for. Things like how to make animations, like you need to figure out how people do it in other languages, look at a different tutorial, and then kind of like translate it into Rust. And that comes with a bunch of complexity because, you know, sometimes it's ECS and like it's a bit more complicated. You can't just like take and write Rust. But all those things are getting better. And I think compared to the advantages, like this is nothing. So this is my final slide. It was really pretty before we added that QR code. But basically now is your time to ask questions. I will just mention 2 things. If you wanna like follow what I'm doing and keep up with my Rust activities, Twitter is the best place, and my handle is on the bottom left. That's like the game I'm making, and you can sort of play it on itch. I'll share a link afterwards. And I'm also making a book about how to make a game in Rust. So it's kind of how to make Snake-ish with a bit more, with more going into like the Rust things about it. And I hope it will kind of be a continuous thing so I can make it better and better. That's not out yet. So if you want to keep up with that, follow me on Twitter and you'll be notified when it's released. So we're not doing questions now, but I guess we're doing questions at the end. So I can hand over to the next presenter.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Clap emojis, please. Can I have loads of clap emojis, loads of fire emojis? Okay, I want everyone. I want to see the dab emojis. And a big shout out to everyone with the crab emojis. How could I forget the crab emojis? The most important emoji for us Rustaceans is the crab emoji. So loads of claps, loads of crabs, loads of dabs. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Olivia. Okay, our final speaker is Phillipe Vinchon. He is a Frenchman in Ireland, a developer with a background in Scala and functional programming in general. And he's going to be speaking to us about how he's applied a lot of what he's learned from his background in Scala to making games in Rust. Thank you very much. Claps, crabs, and loads of dabs for Phillipe, please, as he gets started with his talk. Thank you all very much.
Hi all. Thanks, Ernest, for the intro. Couldn't have said it better myself. I've got this wonderful presentation all set up, and I have just realized after, sharing and presenting and getting everything ready that I've got a gorgeous typo on the URL for my blog. So great way to start. So my name's Phillipe. I'm Phillipe Vinchon, and I would love to talk to you about game engines, more precisely Rust game engines. The problem though is I don't really know games that much. I would love to. I know how to play games way too much, but my day-to-day is more or less working with Scala, Docker, cloud providers, and usually it's going to be websites. So it's going to be consumed by HTTP calls or similar ways. So when we're thinking about games, I really feel that I'm completely out of my depth. I would love to learn, and I'm learning. I've built this wonderful tic-tac-toe, but I really think like I shouldn't be here. I've learned Rust using this wonderful tool online called Exorcism. And I've started learning that 2 years ago, and I'm still getting frequent notifications. And it's notifications by people that look at my solutions and that think that my solutions are intriguing. They're different. They're ways that they might not always have done it or that they never thought about it. They're not always good ways. Like I do have a few Stack Overflows every now and then, but it just made me think that actually the way I write my Rust is a bit different to how a lot of people write Rust. I would write a very Scala-y Rust, and that's something that is surprising to a lot of them. So I was going to take a bit of time and talk about how I'm learning Rust, how I'm writing my tic-tac-toes and my other fairly silly games in Rust, but using Scala in a certain way. So I want to highlight that everything that I'm going to talk about is mostly going to talk about quality. So if you ever saw this pyramid, usually you've got like performance and costs and all those things. And I just want to look at the quality aspect. And it's not general quality, it's what I would call my idea of quality. We'll definitely not agree on a lot of the following, and mostly because we've got different concerns. And so I want to highlight, just for everyone to be happy at the end, that those are my ideas. And I would love for everyone to agree with them, but I know that that's not always the case. So to start off, I'm going to talk about immutability. And so in games, immutability can be very, very helpful. Alex talked about threading and different things happening and mutating that same variable in different thread causing issues. And so if we think about it, if we have, for example, 3 enemies shooting at your character at once, your health bar might actually take 3 times the amount of damage, or potentially only once, depending on which thread finishes first or how they actually run in parallel. And so I think that immutability is actually something really, really important. You really need to make sure that you're going to have 2 different variables, each having a different state, but you want to make sure that they don't overlap or they don't hurt one another. So you're all going to pay that price with a memory footprint, but hopefully every state of your variable is going to be checkable and is going to be valid and not going to be overwritten and a bunch of things like that. Another thing I think a lot about is nullables, and Rust is great on that point. It doesn't really have nulls, so that avoids a whole lot of null pointer exceptions. But then you've got a lot of people wondering, like, how does that work? And so imagine in your game, you've got a bunch of keys to choose a weapon. So for example, you press number 4 and you get the shotgun, or 3 and you get the flower pot, or whatever it is. If you haven't picked up that weapon, if that weapon's not already in your handy bar, what happens if you press that button? And so you don't really want to throw a null pointer exception trying to handle a weapon that you haven't already selected. And so Rust has these options. They're known with different names. You've got maybe in Haskell and option in Scala as well. So it's not a particularly new way of doing things, but it's something that a lot of languages are still a bit lacking behind. And for Rust being this new, they're able to just put it in right from the start. And that allows you to have, for example, a piece that is on a board, so it has coordinates, or potentially it does not have coordinates, and it's not actually on the board available. And so here I've got my piece A without any coordinates. It's in my pocket, and then I've got coordinates so I could see it on the board. Similarly enough, you've got throwables, and it's a very similar idea. It's something that is present or not, but it's usually more important in relation to errors. You're going to be able to say why a certain thing is present or not. And so you could have that a lot for network calls and similar problems like that, but it could also be a file import. If you allow a user to select their own avatar image, but they've selected the wrong image, you want to be able to inform them that's not a valid image. Or if they click on the share button and they haven't connected their accounts, they need to be informed of how to change things. And so that's where the code examples are going to get a little trickier. So going back to our coordinates, we've got this wonderful .parse that are on strings. And that allows you to convert or to parse the string into a particular type, in this case, a coordinate. And so that requires you to have an implementation of a from string trait. And so here we've got our from string. And so the from string is going to have a bunch of logic, but you need to be able to know at which point what failed. So for example, my string had the 2 coordinates separated with a semicolon. So the first thing you actually want to check is to make sure that if you split your string by the semicolon, you only have 2 coordinates. You only have your x or your y. If you get more, you want to be able to tell people, wait, the string you gave me, or whatever you gave me, can't actually be converted to coordinates because I have not enough or too many information. And similarly enough, my x and y's, they're numbers. So if I can't convert them in this example to an unsigned int, then I want to inform again the user, you've given me wrong data. And so there's one little thing I slipped in there, the applicative tupled. So applicative is a fairly scary word. Don't worry, it's going to be pretty simple. The overall idea is I've got this function called tupled, which takes 2 results. And those 2 results are going to be combined into a result that is going to be the tuple of their results. And so what that means is if your 2 results are okay and they're working, then you're going to get an okay back. But if either one or the other is an error, then you're going to want to return the error you found. So it's a simple little thing that removes a bit of boilerplate. Another thing that's important, I think, quality-wise, is pattern matching. So you've got those matchables. It could be, for example, your character is walking on top of a particular surface. And depending on the collision, what you collide with, you're going to have a different reaction. So for example, you could be on a gel that's going to make you faster or one that's going to make you bounce. And that's going to be able to be overlooked by a just gel. And so you've got these different instances, these different implementations for each one of them. In a game, another way you could represent this is with game state. So I've got a state and I've got an initialize state, which is going to set up a board. Then I've got a select piece, which is going to ask the player to select a piece, and a destination to be able to move the selected piece somewhere. And once that happened a bunch of times, then you could reach the end game. And so here we're going to have just a function, and we're going to be able to match the state and run a different function in every single scenario. And so like that, we keep the overall logic very clean and very simple to follow, but we're also going to be able to break down every part in something much cleaner. I'm going to look now at chainables. We've got a whole library or a whole set of functions on iteratives and iterables to make sure that the code looks nice and is pretty. I put in Left 4 Dead there, but I can't actually think of a way of iterating over things. I just thought it continued with the same theme, and it's a cool game too. So that's the previous version of our handling error. And the code looks fine. Like you've got 4 different steps. One, you slice. Then you've got the first error, which requires you to have 2 coordinates. Then you convert those coordinates to numbers, and you finally return the coordinates. And that code is nice. But you could actually write it in a dot notation type of thing. You could chain every single command to make the code what I would consider cleaner, a little easier to approach. And so similar to the applicative, here a hidden little piece, and it's the dot pipe. If you've ever used Bash before, you could guess what dot pipe does. And it's basically this idea that you're going to have a function, and that function is going to take the elements it's been called on, and it's going to pass it to a function that's given to it. So if I've got an integer and I do dot pipe on it, that dot pipe is going to take a function that will receive an integer. And so like that, I'm able to write all my code in a very neat dot notation type of way. Lastly, we've got recursions. And And so recursions in game devs, it's really funny. I've looked online and you can't really find that many examples of why to use recursions. But there's one actually staring us in the face, which is pretty obvious. And it's hitbox. Just hit detection as a whole is great in recursion. You don't want to to compare your current element with everything in the world, because then you've got so many polygons to compare it with. What you actually want to be able to compare it with is a subset of those polygons. So if you're able to put, for example, all the floor in one massive polygon, then you're going to be able to say, is my polygon within this massive one? And if it is, then you could start recursion within that big one to find the smaller one it actually contains. So it's one way of avoiding iterative calls that wouldn't be as easy. And so if we look back at our run function that we had before, if we want to write a certain amount of code, or at least today, a lot of things people would do is just have a loop. And that works. But the problem is there you would have a mutable state. And my rule number one was don't use mutable. So that's not a way that I actually encourage. I don't really enjoy this way. But a lot of people that used Rust before would know that recursive calls don't actually work in Rust. There is no tail call optimization. And what that really means is if you call a recursion function enough times, then you're going to have a stack overflow. And so there's one way around that, and it's actually to use trampolining. And it converts, or it changes where you store the memory from the stack to the heap, and avoids having that issue. And so if you actually do all those steps, I think that you've got a much cleaner code, one that is closer to the functional programming I'm used to. And yeah, that's more or less my talk. If you have any questions, Slido's open. Ernest, any follow-up?
Oh, no, just to say thank you very much. And thank you very much for giving your amazing insights. I loved the game references that you used. You know, you're a man who knows your stuff. So loads of clap emojis, please. Clap emojis, fire emojis, crab emojis. You're definitely on fire. You are definitely on fire, Phillipe. Thank you very much for those insights. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a couple of minutes to move over to the Q&A panel side of things, where we've collated all of the questions on Slido, and then we're going to go through them. Okay, so just bear with us one moment, and I'm going to get ourselves together for that. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So we're now going to have the Q&A session. Thank you all for hanging around. I know it's probably dinner time and you've got stuff cooking or you've got stuff going on in the microwave. Thank you for hanging out with us. Thank you to our speakers who gave excellent presentations. Thank you for all of the insights that you shared. Thank you for all the information that you gave us around the state of game development in Rust. And, you know, we know that things are still pretty early, but the potential of the language, the potential of the ecosystem, the potential of the tools that are available bode well for the future. So thank you very much for all of your insights, and thank you for the inspiration to go out and try and learn Rust through gaming, which is one of the natural ways that you tend to learn a programming language. Every tutorial that I've ever used always has been geared towards learning the principles through gaming. So thank you for sharing those experiences with us. A big thank you to Ares and TrueLayer for providing the framework for us to put this meetup on. And I mean, we couldn't do this without you. So it's always a big thank you to TrueLayer for that. Hopefully we'll be back in our home, in our Rust home soon. Right, so let's start with some questions. The first question is from Ricardo Delphin, and we're gonna go with the top question that he's asked for. I don't know who this is for. Okay, we'll give this one to Alex first because he's the lead of the GameDev working group. Ricardo asks, I want to contribute back to the Rust gaming effort. What are the best ways of getting started, and how do I find good GitHub issues to start with? So we'll start with Alex on that.
Oops. I think this is working. I think I'm gonna paste you the link for the GitHub issues. Most of them have tags, and it's the Rust-GameDev GitHub, what's it called? Team, I think. So you can find us there. Most issues have tags. As I said, you can sort through them, find something that interests you, or even open a new issue if you have something that you'd like addressed. And also we have a GameDev focused chat room in the official Rust programming language Discord. And you can find us there as well and talk to us if you want more clarifications or help around it. I think I managed to respond to your question in the Slido thing, just so you have the links in there. Yep.
We'll also tweet all of those links out as well. So I'll get, in the process of getting everyone's slides, presentation slides, I'll also tweet out all of those resources and GitHub repos for you as well. Thank you very much. Anyone else have any insights on how they can get started in helping out? What do you feel is needed in terms of resources and help to make the Rust GameDev ecosystem more robust and more fully featured? Olivia, if you've got anything.
I don't have anything on that, but I can talk about the frameworks. Maybe it's a little bit related.
Yes, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I get this question a lot, so that makes me think maybe we should really do something with the working group, like prepare some sort of assessment of the frameworks and things that exist. So I use Jez, GGEZ, and that's really good for 3D games. There is support for 3D games in, I think there is support for 3D there as well, but I've mainly been doing 2D, so I don't know that much about that. I would say there's a lot of frameworks, like game engines, and they're all pretty comparable. So yeah, maybe we should just have some more documentation on like which one you should choose depending on kind of your use case, because they have slightly different things they're better or weaker at. Yep.
Thank you very much. The next question is for Phillipe, and it's from Matthew again. What would be one of the features from Scala that you miss in Rust?
I've been working in Scala for 7 years, somewhere like that. And so I've reached a point where I'm mostly using hierarchy types and very functional programming, which Rust doesn't really support. There's ways, a bit like in Kotlin or in Swift, of mimicking higher kinded types, but I would say that's the big number one. I think that tail call optimization, which should be coming to Rust, like we do have the become keyword, but it's just not there yet. Those would be the two big ones, I would say.
Amazing. Thank you very much. We have a question from Jamie. I think this will be to Olivia. Apart from the book on the main website, are there any suggested courses to get started with Rust? So I'll let Olivia take that first and then open that out to the rest of the panel.
So I know there was a course recently and there were a couple of books, I think Rust in Action or something like that. I can try to find the links and share them after this. Yeah, I'm also writing a book about how to make a game. So that might be like more specific on how to make like a simple 2D game, and sort of it touches a bit on ECS as well. So you probably will learn a bit about ECS as well. I'll share the links in the Slido.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else have anything to add on to that?
Resource-wise for Rust, I'm not 100% sure because I've mostly used Exorcism, like I said, and that was really exercise-driven, and so that was an interactive way of learning. But game-wise, I've mostly looked at almost drag-and-drop things. Like there's Construct, Game Maker wouldn't be too bad as well, and they're great to understand certain simple concepts, like what a game loop is or things like that. When you do come from backend services where it's really action or event driven by a user call, you do forget that the whole world needs to evolve even though when you don't have a request. So I think sometimes starting with simple frameworks without any real language can teach you a few things.
Thank you very much, Phillipe. We have a question for Alex from Angelus. Regarding asset pipelines, is there an effort to create an async-like crate in pure Rust? The async Rust crate is not robust enough. Alex, any?
Not that I know of. So maybe if there is, I don't know about this effort. There's a lot of work that needs to be done around assets, but I think the main issue here is that whoever does something just does it for their own project and engine. I will look towards what the Amethyst people are doing with regards to asset pipelines and loading assets and what their formats are and what they're using. But yeah, that's basically my question. I'm not sure there's someone handling that right now. It's a great idea for a project though.
Thank you very much, Alex. And actually, to follow on that, there is a question about Amethyst. I don't know where it's gone. I think it's just disappeared. But I think it was generally asking on thoughts on Amethyst. So this will be for the entire panel. We'll start with Alex on his general thoughts on it's from Kiffin. And the question is, sorry, I'm just going to try and view that a bit better. What are your impressions on the Amethyst game engine? So we'll start with Alex again, just because that's a follow on, and then it's open to the rest of the panel to give their opinions.
So I think it's quite a good project and it progressed a lot. The only worrying thing for me when I first looked at it 1 year ago was that there weren't any big examples of games using Amethyst. And so I'm making my own game in an engine that I wrote from scratch just because I like pain, I guess. But basically, I think it's good for a 3D engine, maybe. I don't know, but for a 2D engine, I found it at the time a bit too complex. And GG Easy, when I looked, it was just starting, so that's why I built my own thing. I think there've been quite big efforts in simplifying how everything works in Amethyst and make it easier for users, but I haven't looked at it since.
Ernest, you're muted, just in case.
Hi, yes, sorry, that was my bad. What I said was, does anyone else have any opinions on amethysts from experience or otherwise? And then we're going to go to the top 2 questions.
I just remember when I started making my game, I did have a quick look at like what the options were for game engines, and I did see Amethyst. I just got the impression that it was a little bit less beginner friendly than Jazz was. So that was really my main reason. I don't know how it's evolved now, so can't really speak for the current state.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, Peter has a question for Alex. You said regarding as a weak point that it takes 6 to 7 seconds to recompile your project, but how does this compare to a C++ project?
So I think maybe I need to clarify. It might be actually link time, but not compilation time. But basically, C++, my project right now, it's about 10K, 12K lines of Rust, plus third-party libraries. And C++ project of the same size on my computer, not totally scientific, is below 1 second. It's kind of like half a second if you edit a C++ file and not the header that's included everywhere. So that's kind of the most annoying part for me right now. I guess there's no easy way around it, but I did notice it has improved with newer Rust versions. So that's cool. People are working on making it faster.
Cool. Thank you very much, Alex. Kiffin has another question for Phillipe. He's asking to, can you explain trampolining in more detail?
Sure. So the overall idea is your function in a trampolining function returns one of 2 results. One result is an accumulator, which is basically going to be used to call itself again. And the other one is an end state, which is basically going to say, I'm finished. And usually what frameworks or libraries do for trampolining is it's just syntactic sugar for below being just a while loop. And so while you've got the accumulator, you continue, and until you've got the done state, you continue again. So basically you break once you reach your done state. And so that way your function, which is called, is going to be called in a way that looks recursive, but it actually isn't. So it's cheating in a way, but it still makes your code or the code you see a little nicer than without trampolining.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Phillipe. Do you have any resources, any links to any resources or documentation around trampolining that we can share afterwards for people who really want to get into the guts of it?
I wouldn't have anything particularly. What's interesting though is trying to Google till call optimization for Rust. There's usually a bunch of debates, very long GitHub threads about why it's not done yet. and potentially alternatives via trampolining. I think there's 3 or 4 different crates that you can use. Some worked better than others, depending on your problem. Some use macros, some use their own wrappers. So it's, trampolining Google,
Cool.
best friend.
No worries, no worries. Thank you for that. We now have another question, or we have a question from Matsi, and this is also a question that's dear to my heart as well. So thank you for that. How sophisticated is the support for 3D graphics in current Rust game engines / frameworks? So from Are We Game Yet, there are a number of 3D graphics libraries that are generally well known, like GFX.rs and Volcano, Gilliam, which I think is an OpenGL wrapper. But I think starting with Alex, how sophisticated is the support for them?
I think it's pretty good, actually. So besides the usual things listed there and popular stuff like Randy, GFXRS, you even have nice Vulkan libraries that
Volcano.
you can interact with.
Yeah.
So you have what you need. The problem maybe is you just need to glue the bits together most of the time, unless depending on what you want to do. But one interesting one that I found quite recently, and I'm quite excited about for this kind of hobbyist space, is Web GPU. So basically, Web GPU isn't only for the web, so you can use it in your own projects, and it provides I would say, an OpenGL alternative for people who would like to write OpenGL, but for various reasons, it's quite hard these days to write good OpenGL because it's kind of deprecated everywhere, and people are pushing you towards Vulkan, DirectX 11, 12, or whatever. So GFXRS provides this kind of nice in-between abstraction that's filling up that I would like something simple space, but also with a bit of power behind it. So I think that's a pretty interesting library that you can try out. I was quite happy with it. So, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Alex. Has anyone else got anything to add about how they've experienced the robustness of, with their experience of robustness of the graphics libraries in Rust? Cool. We have a question for Olivia. I'm gonna kind of chain 2 questions together because they're very similar. So there's a question from Richard who's asking Olivia, can you recommend a good source to learn more about ECS? And that kind of works for the question from Daniel M, where he's asking, where would you suggest starting with 2D games in Rust? Any recommended tutorials, frameworks, or videos? So we can start with Richard's and then kind of extrapolate that out into Daniel's question as well.
Yeah, so I would say in terms of ECS, I've used Specs, and I think Specs is kind of widely used. I think Legion is kind of newer, but I don't think I think Amethyst is considering switching from Specs to Legion. So that's kind of an interesting discussion. If you want to, I can link in the slide, but you can see kind of the discussion that is going on about the trade-offs, really comparing them. So that might give you some sort of insight into how they compare. In terms of ECS, I think a lot of people write their own. I probably wouldn't as a beginner. I would just use something off the shelf and then kind of figure out how to use it. And if you think you can, make it better, or you want to do it for fun, you can make your own. In terms of the resources, I think there are some tutorials online. I've written some. I know there's some on Reddit. I think the Rust GameDev Reddit group is really good for that. Normally, like if you ask a question, I think you'll probably like get back some old posts or things like that. But again, maybe this is something that we can work on with the working group to sort of streamline a little bit, like Rust newbie starter page, sort of here are all the links and things. Actually, yeah, I don't know if Alex wants to speak a bit about his experience writing his own ECS, or you are using specs as well, Alex.
No, I'm not using specs, but I think if you have time and nothing else to do, you should just write your own just to see how painful it is and what kind of trade-offs you're forced to make in certain situations. And then it's going to be easier when you have to choose one. So I'm kind of a pretty big fan of just learning by pain and trying stuff out, I suppose. But yeah. I'm happy with what it turned out to be. They're not that hard, actually, so you can get started quite easy. It's just as you progress, it becomes more and more interesting.
I'm just going to chain in another question just because it's on the topic that we're already on. Kiffin is asking the recommended library, ECS, Specs, Legion, or another. And that's open to all.
Yeah, I think
So
we
we'll
answered
start,
this a little
yeah,
bit. I think
yeah.
we said Specs is kind of like really popular, and Legion is a really good alternative, but not really widely adopted yet. So probably go with a more popular one unless there's something that you will need that you can't find.
Cool. Okay, we have a very cool question for Alex here from Mac. Is the lack of the fast math and fast floating point optimizations really a big deal when it comes to game dev and number crunching?
So this is a bit of a tricky one because we didn't, in my experience, when I tried, like played with tiny physics engines and things like that in Rust, it wasn't a big deal at the time, but it might be a big deal. And if you look at all the game engines, they mostly do enable those floating point optimizations, even if you have loss of precision sometimes or other problems that can occur, because I mean, it's a game, so basically people are a bit more relaxed in terms of correctness constraints in this environment just to get some performance squeezed out. So I think it might be a big deal, or at least a medium deal later, but it's hard to reach a consensus around this kind of thing and how it should be enabled, and in what way can it be enabled such that it doesn't violate the other constraints that Rust has in terms of correctness and all of that.
I did it. Hello, can you hear me? My mic keeps muting, apologies. So say we'll take 2 or 3 more questions and then we're off to the pub virtually, all right? The slides will be shared after the event. So Chris, Phillipe, great talk from everyone. All of the slides will be shared via Twitter, and they'll also be posted up on the meetup page as well. Okay, another question. This one has been around. Are there any game studios or popular C++ game dev libraries taking an interest in Rust?
Not sure about game studios because I don't work at one anymore, but there's a really cool game studio that I'd like to mention here. So the Embark Studio is actually a Rust shop. So they do a lot of also open source with Rust, which is pretty cool as they give back to the community quite a bit of contributions and also the open source and libraries. So that's one of the bigger studios that I know of, in the sense that they do also open their work. I'm not sure what other studios are doing in terms of this kind of thing. One other thing is Go.Engine seems to have quite a keen interest in Rust, so they have even bindings, and I see all the time that they have a lot of interaction with the Rust community, and it's a pretty cool open source engine that you might want to take a look at.
That actually follows on from another question from Gilbert. Has anyone used the Rust bindings in Godot? Does anyone have any experience with it? And that's open to everyone.
I know about them. I read some tutorial, but I didn't use them. So I can't be of help, sorry.
No worries. And a big shout out to Improbable studio. They're a middleware studio based in London that have one of our co-organizers, Jamie. He's a game dev at Improbable, and they're doing some interesting things, tinkering around with Rust. He's got a little personal project where he's trying to port some of the middleware that Improbable have from C++ into Rust, or I think it might be C# into Rust. So just wanted to say big shout out to Jamie from there. Last two questions that we have, both from Stephen. So we'll start with the first one. It was mentioned it is going to be hard to get Rust on consoles because of NDAs and the way those platforms work. Is any company pressing this forward? Maybe Alex might be best.
So you can probably guess the answer, but due to NDAs, I cannot say what's happening on the
It's an
private
NDA,
forums.
right? Yeah.
So it's quite interesting situation.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to say this. If you look at the public information that's available, you will see that major consoles are backed by LLVM
Yes.
toolchains. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay. Mysterious. All right. So the last question from Stephen is, I wrote a core library plus backend of my published mobile game in Rust and Unity 3D. Can I still add it to, oh yeah, absolutely. So the answer would be absolutely yes. It encourages more people to do more with Rust. So I think if you want to get in contact with Alex on Twitter, or if you're going to follow everyone going to the Discord channel, you can have a conversation with him there, Stephen, and I'm sure he'll be able to get your game onto Are We Rust Yet? Right. So,
yes. So just talk
okay.
to Andre. So he's the other lead.
Yes.
That is way active in there, and he can get you in. It's no problem. Or raise a PR or whatever.
Amazing. Amazing. I hope that's answered your question, Stephen. Right. So again, a big thank you to our speakers. Thank you very much for doing this. So can we have some clap emojis for everyone who's left in the room? Some clap emojis, some crab emojis, some fire emojis to show your appreciation to our speakers. And if we could also have a big round of applause, some clap emojis for Addis and Trulea for hosting us. Big thank you for everything. Big thank you for everything that you've done. Am I muted? No.
No. Everyone
Okay.
can hear you.
That's great. Okay. So we're going to be hoping to do this again. Similar format, similar sort of approach until things change. And we're going to be aiming to carry things forward like this for the next couple of months. I want to definitely keep a tab on what's going on with everyone doing things in GameDev with Rust. And there will be another showcase like this again, where many more people will also have an opportunity to share their insights and share their learnings and also share their projects. I'm very grateful to all of you for spending your evening with Rust London. You may not even be in London, but it's still great to have you as part of the community and part of the team. I've left the link to the Discord channel where you can go and hang out. You can ask more questions. You can get yourself more acquainted with the Rust game dev community over there. And please, please, please follow the Twitter. I'm just going to put my slide back up so that everyone can follow the Rust London Twitter. Please bear with me. So please, everyone who's in the room, who may not have been here at the beginning, please follow Rust London users. And also, this is the link to the Discord channel. You can go in there right now and continue the conversation, continue the vibe, and a big thank you again to everyone. So see you next month, and there'll be more announcements made about that. Thank you very much.